So we've all been there, we all, pass somebody by the water cooler, the coffee, station, and maybe you're not having the best day. Maybe you are having a good day, but you've also got things on your mind, and somebody says, "How are you?" And you just, it's just easier to go, "I'm fine," and not really think about what that actual emotion might be. So today we are going to talk about real emotions at work and how to deal with the good ones and the bad ones. All right, so let's take a look at what our objectives are. First, we're going to learn why our emotions are actually important at work because they are still important while we're on the job. We're also going to learn to identify prevailing emotions that are exhibited in the workplace because there are some that are quite common. And we are going to learn to use your emotions to your advantage. So, a lot of times, emotions and feelings get that bad rap, and it's like, well, no, they can actually be a good thing and really help out. So, we're going to talk about that. All right. And for our first objective, again, we're going to learn why, again, emotions are actually important at work. And thankfully, we actually do have some scientists and researchers out there who are studying and compiling this information fairly regularly. So let's look at some of that information. The folks at University of Cambridge, back in 2024, they conducted some research on emotions, and they remind us how our emotions, they began from an evolutionary standpoint. We have them to help us survive. And if you were trying to, again, obviously, we wouldn't have survived without our emotions. And what they did, in the beginning, back in the beginning of our caveman days, was, if you didn't have all the facts that were necessary, you didn't have your logic to depend on to make a decision, then you made the decision based on your emotions. All right. So the scientists, they studied brain scans and all this stuff and everything, and they concluded that feeling is doing. Okay, it's our emotions that actually push us to act and motivate us to do something. So they propel us to an action. Additionally, how we act, whether physically or behaviorally, depends on whatever emotion we experience. So you guys know that, right? You're going to not act exactly the same way when you're sad as you do when you're super excited. And we all know that. So just a little bit of intro here and continuing on with this intro a little bit, emotions, as you see there on your screen, they come in many shapes and sizes and degrees, and we can feel them all at once, maybe too many at once. Sometimes we have an emotion and it seems to last days or for a lifetime, right? But we can do things when we have a feeling pop up. We can figure out ways to use them to our advantage, and that's what we'll talk about in objective 3. But right now, just keeping in the forefront of your mind that we come to work with other stuff, and how you conduct yourself when you should be focused on trying to finish that spreadsheet, but maybe you're worried about your kids, or, oh, I have to get, I have 4 meetings, but I'm really upset still about that thing that happened with my family last night. So things are always on our minds, and we still have to figure out how to come to work. So this lady here that I'm introducing you to, this is Dr. Susan David. She is a professor and psychologist at Harvard Medical School, and she has quite a lot to share with us about emotions. I mean, this is her wheelhouse. This is what this lady is devoted her studies to. And so she reminds us that our emotions are designed to help us address and adapt to stress. Right? That's what they're really, again, back to that evolutionary standpoint, this is what they're designed to do. Dr. David is also the author of this book here, Emotional Agility: Get Unstuck, Embrace Change, and Thrive in Work and Life. It reached #1 on the Wall Street Journal's bestseller list, and it discusses how to actively manage thoughts and feelings. Furthermore, David gives us a definition of emotional agility, and we'll revisit this again in a little bit. But that definition is: emotional agility is a process that enables us to navigate life's twists and turns with self-acceptance, clear-sightedness, and an open mind. So I will remind you of that definition here in a little bit. All right, so when we're at work, emotions on the job. I think we can all agree that when we're here, sometimes we experience any of those emotions that we saw on our poll. And when that happens while we're trying to do our jobs, it can really throw everybody for a loop, right? Sometimes you're not ready for that. And in addition to the emotions that we already discussed, another one that often happens at work is the feeling of being overwhelmed, right? So you get overwhelmed about what? Well, a lot of people have very demanding jobs and a lot of things that they're trying to keep up with from day to day to day and keep track of. And you might be also in the same time, you're balancing with your home life with your work life. Again, all of these compounded cause overwhelming feelings, stressful feelings. And that's very easy for that to happen. These will then lead or can lead to other emotions. I mean, if you look at the woman in the picture there, she looks like she's about ready to break. Right. So we know that sometimes just being a little stressed can lead to frustration, anger, other things. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes. All right. So we do have to note that again, emotions come in many forms, and for the most part, we experience positive and negative emotions. Um, Dr. David actually teaches in her book there that we don't really necessarily want to label our emotions as positive or negative because they all do serve a purpose. But again, just for the sake of conversation right now, and everybody knows the difference, I think, between what's positive and what's negative. So obviously, positive emotions are the ones that are pleasurable to experience, and we want those and invite them, right? All right. Well, on the other side of that, we do have that negative emotions are the ones we don't want to experience. They're unpleasurable. They don't feel good. We don't usually like that. Let's look at this statement. And that is not an acronym. The sentence is emotions are data, not directives. And so before we get into this conversation, I just want to hear from you. What do you think that means? What's that sentence mean to you guys? How do you interpret it? Don't automatically act. Absolutely. Yes. So you guys are correct. Emotions are just emotions. They're not facts. That's a very good thing to keep in mind, right? I was actually in, oh goodness, I think I was in Kroger one day last week and I kind of had a sad thing event. Just on a personal note, I lost a pet and I was in Kroger and I was trying to shop and think about life and everything. And that I know in one of Debbie's classes, she talks about emotional hijacking. And I stood there and I thought that to myself. I was like, I'm being emotionally hijacked right now and I don't like it. So let's take a look at this little cartoon. So you guys are correct about everything that you just said, right? And so what Susan David has to say again here is that emotions, yes, as you said, they give us information. They help us make decisions. They signal to things that we are supposed to do or things even that we deeply care about. And as you also see on this little cartoon here, it's not so much about the negative or the positive, but what is that emotion signaling you to do? Because whether it is negative or positive, it's telling you to do something. So excellent comments. So what else can cause us to be emotional at our jobs? Well, one of those things might fall under this heading of professional setbacks. So we all know that sometimes the boss has to break bad news. And what can that look like? Being passed over for a raise or a promotion, losing a major client. You maybe get laid off. Obviously we hope none of these things happen to anybody, but they are a reality of being in the workforce. Projects stall or failure, company restructuring. We have, and then just workplace conflict. People don't always get along, and we try, but we don't always get along, right? I think other things that can be included as professional setbacks would maybe be things like and again, we can probably think of plenty of other things to put on this list. I'm sure that, it depends also on what type of work that you do, what professional setback you might have. But, dealing with these things is obviously going to raise feelings of disappointment or confusion, frustration, any of that kind of, anxiety, any of those types of emotions. On the other side of that, though, we have those days that we come to work and we feel like this. It's a win. And everything is going exactly the way it's supposed to go. And when we have those days, we are experiencing those pleasurable emotions that we talked about. And the most prevailing positive emotions on the job are actually calmness and comfort, excitement, and gratitude. So we have accomplished our objective one, which brings us to objective two now, which is to identify prevailing emotions exhibited in the workplace. All right. And again, keeping these emotions in mind as we move along. So, with that knowledge, we're going to look at some of those emotions that are most prevalent in the workplace. And the first one up actually is anger, which you guys, said most of you have experienced before. And, that's just kind of life that happens, right? We know that anger is an emotion that's characterized by tension and hostility, and this can arise from several different types of things. Frustration, real or imagined injury by another, perceived injustices, and then they can manifest in behaviors that are designed to remove the object of anger. Because usually when we're angry, we want to get rid of that. Again, it's not a pleasurable feeling, so we want to stop it and get rid of the thing that's making us angry. All right. Of course, I'm sure there are other, things that we could maybe add to this list, but again, this is just what is defined by the American Psychological Association as anger. And when we're identifying anger, right, so some of us might get really angry over a printer jamming, but somebody else might be dealing with a really angry client, and then that in turn is making them angry. So what we get angry about is kind of going to be dependent on who you are and how much rope you have to give. So, next prevailing emotion is excitement. All right. And that's a good thing. Maybe you're excited about a new project that you were hoping that you were going to get to work on. Maybe you're getting all of your stuff done before it's time to leave on Friday and you're ahead of your schedule. So, woo, excitement. And this is characterized by a temporary state of heightened um, energy, anticipation, and alertness. Also, again, I mean, you guys know what it looks like. I mean, the lady's a perfect example there in the picture, but when a person is excited, they have the potential for a reward sometimes. Maybe there's just that sense of novelty or, knowing that some uncertainty, but that's the good kind of uncertainty when somebody's going to give us a surprise. We like good surprises, right? All right. So, all of these things. And this feeling can also occur. You're going to have increased heart rate, more rapid breathing, dilated pupils, tingly skin, and sweating. The thing that's really interesting as I was doing this research is they talk about how excitement, and we're going to look at anxiety in a minute, but how anxiety and excitement are so like there's a fine line. They're so closely related. And so all of these things that you would perceive in someone physically when they're excited are also the same things. Your body responds the same way when you're under stress. Right. So that's just sort of an interesting thing to note. So next up on the other end of spectrum from excitement is calmness. Oh, don't we all like to be calm? All right, so you might be calm again because you're ahead of your deadlines. Maybe you know that on Friday when you check out, you are going on vacation for a week and you don't have to do anything else. So again, we know that calmness is, if we look at the definition, it is characterized by having inner peace, mental clarity, absence of agitation or stress, and it isn't just, again, and this is an interesting thing to note too, that it's not just the absence of stress and agitation, but knowing and actually physically feeling that your nervous system is just stable and secure. Right. And I think we all know what that feels like when there's nothing making us, when we can be like that guy in the picture. That's the best place to be, right? All right, so next up, we have this one here, which I think you guys said 71% anxiety. Again, is common. It's not unusual for most people to experience some anxiety now and again. And this is, again, a state characterized by feelings of tension. And like I said, anxiety is kind of like excitement, but you can see why it's different because here we're worried. It's like, oh no, there's an impending danger. Oh, some sort of catastrophe, a misfortune, apprehension. You're going to have those like racing, worried thoughts in your mind. And then all of this, again, can manifest in the physical changes, again, similar to excitement with the increased heart rates, tense muscles, quickened breathing. Some people do actually sweat, you know. So, but you would obviously, I think, know the difference between somebody being excited versus somebody who's looks like that lady in the picture. And this last prevailing emotion that we see in the workplace is unfortunately sadness. Again, a common emotion. Everybody experiences this from time to time, not unusual to feel sad. It is defined by the American Psychological Association, characterized by expressions of grief, unhappiness, loss, and that loss is usually because of someone or something. There is sadness can encompass helplessness, hopelessness, sorrow. So any of those words are things that, you know, fall under the category of feeling sad, right? So there, sorry, that one came up. Okay. So again, these feelings are usually get brought on by the loss of someone or something. So with that said, it brings us to our third objective, which is we're going to take all of these emotions and we're going to talk about how to use them to our advantage. Because the thing that is fantastic is when you can master your emotions and really tap into them, it really does feel like a superpower. You feel powerful and like, you know, you're in charge of you. So I'll remind you again about Dr. David's book, and that emotional agility definition is the ability to actively, and I think that's important to think about that, the word actively manage your thoughts and feelings, and a process that enables us to navigate life's twists and turns with self-acceptance, clear-sightedness, and an open mind. So fortunately for us, Dr. David has made this a pretty easy thing to follow, right? And there's 3 steps to gaining emotional agility. All right. So it's really kind of that simple. Now it looks simple, but it, you know how those things can be. So while these steps are not going to make you a master of your emotions overnight, the idea is to continue to practice and continue to practice. And with each time you do that, each time you go through these 3 steps, and we're going to do this together in more detail in just a moment, but each time you go through these steps, you're going to get better at it. And then it's going to be easier. And then you're probably not even going to be thinking about the steps because it just comes automatically. So we will start with this one over here, which is we're going to work down these stairs so that we can end up on some solid ground. Starting at the top of the stairs, labeling your emotions. So right now, you may or may not be able to think, you know, hopefully people are in a good mood. But think about what emotion you feel right now. And the thing that's important about this step is to try to think beyond just saying, oh, I'm happy. Well, be a little more specific. Are you ecstatic? Are you excited? Are you thrilled? Right? What words, specific words can you put to the feeling that you're having? So the next part, so this kind of goes with step 1, words can be medicine. So in addition to naming your emotions and labeling, this is a concept that 2007 UCLA psychologists, they conducted brain imaging studies. And when people actually spoke out loud and said, today I'm calm, speaking, they saw the brain activity light up when people actually said the emotion as opposed to people who just thought it to themselves, right? So it matters whether or not we say what we're feeling. And again, they say that doing so can kind of take away the sting, that when you actually say how you feel and you say it out loud, that eliminates some of the pain that you might be feeling. If it's sadness or anger, it's going to make that emotion less intense. We know that when we're at work, we don't always have the opportunity to maybe sit down and get that therapy session with our bestie that we absolutely probably need. But I hope that everybody does have someone that they can go to and say, can I just talk to you for a few minutes about this thing that I'm disappointed about? or hey, can I talk to you about this thing that I'm really excited about? All right. So having friends at work is important for this. You guys also might have heard when we do our EEFS training, which is the employee engagement for supervisors. Always have to think about that. um, when we do that training, this is part of Q10, and it says, I create an environment in my team where friendships can develop. And I just kind of wanted to make note of that because I think that the Gallup organization, found that to be so important for this reason, for what we're talking about right now, because words can be medicine. And if you don't have friends or people at work to talk to, then you're kind of missing out, right? So they make it, again, when we're having a employee engagement for supervisors, we make a big deal about that because it is important to have people. All right. So we're going to go back to our steps. Okay. So this was just kind of a little add-on. So remember, you name your emotion and maybe you've said it out loud. All right. And so now you're feeling better because you named it, you said it out loud. But now we're going to walk on down the stairs to step 2, and we're going to say, I accept how I feel, right? And this is a little bit easier to do when it's a positive emotion than it is with negative emotion. But the idea here is to embrace your reality, because you have to. This is what it is. Today I'm calm. I feel good. My calmness is going to help me make other people calm. All right. So think about what you would say to yourself, maybe to achieve this step. How might you go about gently accepting the reality of the situation and helping yourself to accept that this is what it is and be courageous and compassionate at the same time. So let's look at this little tip, a side tip that goes along with our step 2. And that is maybe you gain some courage because you have acquired it from other people. So the authors of an article from Harvard Business Review talk about how it takes other people sometimes to help us. We sometimes need to have interaction with others in order to see a different perspective or get different point of view. So I'm sure you guys have all heard of reframing. And again, this is sometimes something that you can do on your own, of course, where you want to take your positive thought or negative thoughts and make them positive. But at the same time, again, as the authors of this article talked about, they really wanted to emphasize that we don't have to always depend on ourselves for resilience, that it's okay to go to others. And in fact, that people and having the influence of those around us is going to help us have a better perspective. Interaction equals motivation for us to continue to persist. So if we know there's somebody in our corner, we're going to try to keep going. We're going to try to keep going. So that again goes along with our gentle acceptance. So hopefully we find some courage and acceptance through our friends and colleagues. All right, so as we come to the last step here, we have labeled our emotions, we have gently accepted them, and now we are standing on this last step, which is to live your values. So what does that mean? So for those of you who said that you were calm today, all right, so it says making this, what you need to do for this step is make this a part of your life, bringing you closer to the person you want to be. So we have come down these stairs and reached our landing, but I also want to just note for you that some of you might be thinking, hey, I've seen something like this before. Isn't there something else like this? You're smart. There is. Emotional intelligence is somewhat related. It's more like a brother or sister to emotional agility. And while there are different steps to emotional intelligence, they are very similarly related as far as having you look inward, asking you to look inward and work on yourself to do better. Before we close today, there are 2 more tips that I would like to share with you about using your emotions to your advantage. And this first one goes right along with this quote here from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So, in other words, practice the pause. Okay. Viktor Frankl was a late psychologist. He's also a Holocaust survivor. He has written a book about his experience. I'm sure you can get that at your local library if you are so inclined. But his statement here invites us again to take that moment before the knee-jerk reaction and just pause. But again, just if you can have that, stifle the knee-jerk reaction, look inward, take a moment. When you can do this, you are so powerful. You become so powerful and you feel so powerful because you're in charge of you. You're in charge of how you respond. You get to make the choice to how you're going to respond. So another thing, again, that we can do to feel better and perform better, because we want you guys to keep feeling like superheroes, of course, right, is something called the reappraisal technique. And this is similar to that reframing technique. So when you reappraise, you are again making yourself powerful because you're taking charge of the situation. So rather than saying something like, oh, I'm so nervous about this presentation I have to give, oh my goodness, I'm excited, right? So you have to just change, you got to change how you see it in your head, right? Not nervous, not worried, but you're excited instead. Maybe you're stuck in traffic. We've all been there, right? But instead of fuming and being angry and getting anxious because you might be late, you're going to be late. There's nothing you can do about it. It's a parking lot. So yay, I have got time to listen to that podcast I've been listening to, or now I've got extra time to listen to the next chapter of the audiobook. You want to try reappraisal, you just want to take whatever that situation is, and if it's negative, you want to put it in a positive light. So give it a try the next time something like that happens and see if you don't feel a little bit better, because again, you're taking control of your emotions, and doing so will help you feel better and perform better. So we have now learned that all these emotions can come in all kinds of shapes and sizes at any time. Oftentimes we don't have much control over it, but hopefully these tips and strategies that we've discussed will aid you the next time you just want to say, I'm fine. All right. So keep working to be more resilient, more emotionally agile, emotionally intelligent, because all of these things are the ingredients to keeping you in charge of you.